Here's one for the books. 2050 is coming sooner than we thought. 2050 is arriving much sooner than expected. In many ways, it's already here. Non-Hispanic whites are already a minority among citizens 10 years old and younger. Analysis suggests that whites will become a minority in the United States population by 2031, almost 15 years before the census estimate. A minority of U.S. voters by 2044, foretelling major political changes in the immediate future. Background. In 1998, a commencement address at Portland State University, Bill Clinton articulated his vision of the America of the future. Today, largely because of immigration, there is no majority race in Hawaii, Houston, or New York City. Within 5 years, there will be no majority race in our largest state, California. In a little more than 50 years, there will be no majority race in the United States. No other nation in history has gone through demographic change of this magnitude in so short a time. 2050 has remained in the American political vocabulary ever since. It represents a dramatic turning point when whites will no longer be default generic American citizens. The historical racial animus between whites and blacks will allegedly dissolve as neither race, indeed no race, will predominate culturally, socially, or politically. Clinton promised a kind of continuity in change. Immigrants are renewing our most basic values and reminding us of what it truly means to be American. But how could there not be a tremendous, unforeseeable transformation of what it means to be American? I think they're emphasizing race before culture right here. The maxim demographics is destiny, attributed to the father of sociology, Auguste Comte, holds doubly true in democracy and mass consumer society. Politics, institutions, norms, fashions, and icons are all subject to change and all respond to people. Like I said, environment dictates and directs culture. The current Republican Party is overwhelmingly white. 90% of votes cast for Donald Trump in 2016 were by whites, a tally that differed little from white support for Mitt Romney and John McCain in 2012 and 2008. As a whole, white Americans are more likely to identify as Republicans than Democrats, 51 to 43%. And despite the general leftward tendency of youth, the majority of white millennial voters are solidly GOP. The situation in the Democratic Party is a mirror reversal. Non-white citizens lean Democrat more strongly than whites lean Republican. African Americans 84 to 8%, Asians 65 to 27%, and Hispanics 63 to 28%. Non-white voters have become vital to the Democratic coalition. Nearly 40% of Hillary Clinton's support in 2016 came from African Americans, Asians, or non-white Hispanics. Due to the fact that whites compose some 70% of the voting population, they remain the critical factor in national elections, particularly critical because they do not engage in the block voting of other races. If whites prefer Republicans to the same extent that African Americans, Asians, or Hispanics prefer Democrats, the United States would effectively be a one-party state. Nevertheless, the GOP have fared rather well by being the white people's party in all but name. Republicans might have lost the popular vote for president in the past 3 elections. However, these setbacks have masked a dominance at all levels of elected governance. As of 2018, Republicans control both chambers of the U.S. Congress and 33 of the 50 state legislatures. Technically, Republicans control 32 legislatures, as Nebraska has a single nonpartisan chamber, but Republicans predominate there as well. Current immigration patterns patently support Democratic coalition, rendering the above arrangements unsustainable. In 1960, some 85% of immigrants came from white bastions like Europe and Canada. Today, only 14% do. Central and South American countries account for more than 50% of total immigration, with Mexico alone making up some 25 to 30%. South and East Asia, whose immigrant populations were negligible in the past, now account for a quarter of the total. The reality of white decline. When Bill Clinton mentioned 2050 in 1998, it was a far-off event, a someday prediction. In reality, 2050 will be here much sooner than the year 2050. In the United States, the rates of growth of the non-white population relative to the white population over the last 50 years suggest that non-white Hispanics will become a minority of the total population around the year 2031. This is 14 years earlier than the official predictions of the 2017 Census Bureau, which projects that non-white Hispanics will first become a minority in 2045. Moreover, a simple growth rate estimate applied to exit polls for the presidential elections ranging from 1976 through 2016 reveals that non-white Hispanics are on track to becoming a minority of voters by the 2044 election. This finding further corroborates the thesis that the official Census Bureau projection is nearly 15 years too late. Our prediction comes in the context of a gradual awakening to the reality of white decline, as William Frey of the Brookings Institute has detailed. For the first time, there is an absolute decline in the nation's white population of more than 9,000 whites between 2015 and 2016, more than 31,000 whites between 2016 and 2017. Although these annual white declines are extremely modest, 0.005% and 0.016% in 2015 and through 2016 and 2016 through 17 respectively, they are an early harbinger of the long-term trend that the Census Bureau projected previously this year. Those projections show that the white population declining after 2023. Wow. Remarkably, the year of Donald Trump's election marked the first absolute decline amongst whites since the 1790 census. The generation in grade school has already reached 2050 status, Frey continues. Minorities outnumber whites nationally for each age under 10, while early estimates reveal that minority white status for some of these youthful ages. This is now solidly the case for individuals born in each year since 2007. Hence, this generation, which might be called Generation Z+, is the first truly minority white generation at 49.6% white, where 26% of its members are Hispanics, 13.6% African Americans, and nearly 10% include Asians and persons of two or more races. This awakening to demographic reality has been gradual and one could say reluctant. Over the past year, the New York Times has published two major pieces on white decline and even extinction anxiety. But as detailed below, there have been countervailing currents that have sought either to deny reality or soften it with euphemism and misdirection. The numbers. Our prediction of white minority status by 2031 is based on census data, but also supported by election exit poll data. Exit poll data is collected independently from census data and is much simpler. Despite being limited to the voting public, it provides a good alternative estimate for the white population and directly measures the political impact of demographics. Table 1 below shows a compilation of exit poll data that is made publicly available by the Roper Center of Cornell University. The historical exit poll data series is the percentage of voters that are non-Hispanic white for presidential elections from 1976 through 2016. Next, the implied ratio of all others to non-Hispanic whites is shown, along with the changes or growth rates of this ratio between elections. Although the growth rate bounces around a bit, there is only one anomalous case of a negative value in 1992. Chart 1 shows the ratio of non-white to white voters in each presidential election on a logarithmic scale. We have fit a simple growth curve model to the ratio derived from the Roper Center data. This curve, which is shown as a straight line on a logarithmic scale in Chart 1, fits the data quite well. It predicts that non-white Hispanics will become a minority of voters by the 2044 election. Note the decline in voter proportion lags behind the decline in total population proportion. For example, non-Hispanic whites were 63.7% of the total census in 2010, see Table 2, but still 70% of the voters as late as 2016, see Table 1. This suggests that non-Hispanic whites will become a minority of the total population 10 years or more prior to the projected minority voter status, probably shortly after 2030. Historical data and official projections. Table 2 below shows the percentage of the total population that is non-Hispanic white, using both historical data and official projections as of 2017 from the Census Bureau. Here, as before, with exit poll data, the ratio of all others to non-Hispanic whites is computed along their corresponding rates and fit with a simple growth curve model. These historical rates for 10-year intervals between censuses are more consistent than growth rates for the exit poll data. Note the growth rates for the projections are a 5-year interval basis. When the growth curve is fit to historical data in the range from 1970 through 2010, this results in a 31% growth rate for every 10 years, which is roughly equivalent to a 14% growth rate for every 5 years. Conversely, the census projections show conspicuously lower growth rate of only 8% for every 5 years. Aside from a huge systemic change in immigration and fertility patterns for which there exists little reason to suspect, this significantly lower rate is not reasonable to project. Chart 2 demonstrates the growth curve is a suitable fit for the historical data, yet it is dramatically out of line with the projection pattern in the official census projections. The low growth rate in the official projection shows non-Hispanic whites first becoming a minority in 2045. In contrast, the growth curve projects the whites becoming first a minority 14 years earlier, around 2031. Wow. The Census Bureau has a history of overestimating whites' share of the population and correspondingly underestimating the rate at which it is declining in projections. I wonder why. Table 3 below shows that the official projections of the census for non-Hispanic whites have tended to decline as the date at which the projection is made gets closer to the actual census date. For the 2010 census, the projections declined progressively from 67.3 to 64.7%, with the actual census number coming in at only 63.7%. The empirical data provided herein suggests that this overestimation of the whites' share in projections continues to this present day. These late projections by the Census Bureau for the decline of the white population are concerning. Of greater concern is the recent appeal by two academics, Dole Myers and Morris Levy, for the Census Bureau to use an unreasonably broad definition of whites for apparently non-scientific purposes. Wow, I told you that. Census Bureau definitions of race, ethnicity are based on self-identification. Non-Hispanic white definition is imperfect but a reasonable measure for the white population. See Appendix 1. Myers and Levy advocate a more expansive definition at odds with common conception that would include mixed race people who only partially identify as white. Myers and Levy claim that a stricter definition of whites may heighten white Americans' anxiety about demographic change. As they wrote this year in the Washington Post, May 18, 2018, under a more expansive definition that counts as white anyone who so identifies, even if they also identify with another race or ethnicity. The white population is not declining. 46% of white Democrats and a whopping 74% of Republicans expressed anger or anxiety when reading about the impending white minority status. But these negative emotions were far less frequent when participants read the second story about a more inclusive white majority. Only 35% of white Democrats and 29% of white Republicans expressed anger or anxiousness about the scenario. This misleading, disingenuously broad definition of white is thus intended to soften the reality of the demographic change so as to delay and dampen the potency of any reaction brought on by this revelation. In other words, they're lying to these white people to save their psyche. Conclusions. Bill Clinton's 1998 prediction of an America in the year 2050 where whites are a minority appears to be on track to arrive much earlier. Analysis of demographic data suggests that 2031 is the new 2050. Even the voting population, which lags significantly in demographic change, is on track for a white minority by 2044. This 2050 America has already arrived for children born in 2007 and later. It's already showing up. Beyond elections and party coalitions, 2050 foretells deeper, even philosophical changes to American politics and the American nation. Why should anyone take for granted freedom of speech, rule of law, environmental protection, and the peaceful transition of power when such values are uncommon in the home countries of recent immigrants? Why indeed should one have much confidence in the perseverance of conservative values like gun rights, personal liberty, the nuclear family, private property, and the free market? If demography is destiny, then America is fast approaching a radically different destination than what its founders intended. Wow. Wow. What can I say? No wonder white folks are up in arms and scared shitless. All over the world, if you look at what's going on in Europe, the same thing is happening with immigrants coming in too fast. You have riots in Germany now by the far right. That's how come you have Charlottesville. Your betters or your managers have seen this for a very long time. They actually see the real numbers. Right here in this article, they're telling you they've been lying for probably the last 20 years about demographic decline of white people and overestimating the number of white people. So if they're overestimating the number of white people, that means they're undercounting everybody else. And these are their designations, not ours. And if 90% of the Republican Party is white, as Cerulean Grace says, the Southern strategy by the Republicans that appeal to their demise as a race so they can continue to have control. No wonder there's a big pitch by black conservatives for black people to join the Conservative Party or join the Republican Party. They can't tell you the real agenda, which is to serve the white agenda. If the Republican Party is 90% white and you move over and you throw your weight behind it and it gets more power, guess what? The agenda is going to be served. Is it going to be yours? And they want to give us the illusion that we can actually change the Republican Party when it's so overweighted by what? White people and white values. And I'm not saying that's wrong. Let's get this straight. I'm not saying that's wrong. At the end of the day, some things have to be done for everybody, regardless. But I believe in truth in advertising. If you want black people to switch over to the Republican Party, the Republican Party's not offering you anything, as I always say, black Republicans say, I don't vote Democratic. I'll say you don't vote Democratic. That's fine. We should vote Republican. I always ask why. What is the other parties that you're advertising gonna do for black folks? Nobody can give me the answer. Well, Democrats ain't done nothing. Okay, they may or may not have, but this is the boat that we're on. Why should we switch boats? And if white folks are rapidly losing demographic power, because the thing is, we're talking about them becoming a minority in 2031. And that is a mere 12 years from now. That's 3 cycles. And we're not even talking about the transition between that, because there's going to be a transition. That's not going to be a sudden shift. There's going to be a slow transition, starting with this election, and especially in 2020. 2020 is going to look much different than what we actually anticipate. And if you add the opioid deaths amongst adults that's going on, it might be only in the thousands. But if you add that kind of stuff in amongst districts where the white population is disappearing, that transition could probably go even faster, especially if they can't arrest this fentanyl crisis, which is something I'm going to read on later. This is something to take heed. You wonder why I always talk about demographics and population and what's going on in Europe, what's going on here. This flies beneath the radar for most people. And this is the only place that you're even going to hear about demographics on YouTube, especially by a black person. Ain't nobody else going to tell you Negroes about demographics. When has David Carroll ever mentioned demographics in any of his videos? When has Obsidian, who's better than me, or so he says, mentioned demographics in any of his videos? Demographics is destiny. Demographics is culture. Demographics shapes your human environment. And your betters already know that. They're already preparing for that. That's how come they're getting you to mix. Ultimately, they want to stay on top. They don't care what color you are. That's my opinion. And ultimately, they probably will stay on top, regardless of what we think. But the thing is, you want to be more informed. Don't be in the dark. That's all I'm saying. But with that, I'm going to jump off of here. This is BGS out, and I will see you guys on the next one.